It's a wonderful Friday morning, and you are welcome once again to our STEM series. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. So, my name is Estella Hilda Anoman, and I'm the coordinator for American Corner Aboba. I will be your moderator for this session. American Spaces provides access to current and reliable information about the United States through book collections, internet access, events, and activities for everyone. As we celebrate Cybersecurity Awareness Month, it's crucial to enhance our understanding of managing data securely. And who better to guide us through this than our expert facilitator for today? He's in the person of Emmanuel Mingle, and the topic for discussion is efficient file and data management practices for business. So Emmanuel Mingle is a dynamic tech enthusiast with a strong focus on cloud technologies like Ivatrix, AWS, Azure, and Oracle, coupled with expertise in cybersecurity and software development using PHP and Python. So he is currently dedicated staying ahead in the ever evolving technology landscape. And he's currently pursuing an MSc in digital forensics and armed information security at the University of East London. So before we just get right in, if you have any questions along the session, please do type all that in the comment box below and they will be addressed properly. So thank you for staying with us. Over to you, Emmanuel Mingle.
Thank you so much, Estella, and I'm glad to be here and to share my knowledge with all of you. I'll just go ahead and then share my screen, and then we can get started. File and data management practices for offices. And one thing we should note is that, this month is actually over the world is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And, most often than not, when attackers are actually targeting your system, some of the things they're actually looking at. I think you should actually be looking forward to is that you actually make sure that, and then you have some efficient measures to actually manage your data. So we'll look at a couple of those in there as well. Now, as I mentioned, my name is Emmanuel, and I'm a cloud consultant. So everything cloud, I'm actually your guide. And I'm also the lead trainer with Ghana Code Club as well. And currently doing my master's with University of East London, digital forensics and information security. Now, I want us to just go ahead and then look at what we have for today. Now, for our agenda, we have quite a number of things to look at. So we'll look at what data and then file management is, some challenges that companies may face, and then the solutions that they could possibly look at, and then some benefits you can derive when you actually manage your data well. I've talked about one already in terms of security, but there are other options as well. And then we'll look at when we talk about file. Okay, so file storage, what are the options that are available to us? And then we'll dive into how you can actually secure your data assets. So as a company, what are the data assets that you have? And then how can you actually go ahead to secure them? And then we'll look at some best practices when it comes to data management as well. And then when it comes to data integration and migration. So that's for those who might want to do some bit of data analytics. These are some of the strategies you could actually go ahead and then consider. And then we'll look at some use cases if there's some time. So we'll look at these use cases and then how these particular companies went ahead to now manage their data and then share that to the world as well. And then finally, we'll look at still in terms of what the best practices and then some solutions you could have when you're actually managing your data. Now, before we get started, I just want to share a few statistics here. Now, I know that this might not be so visible in there, wherever you are, but the key things I would like you to take note of is in terms of the figures, okay? So if you look at from here, if you look here, we have about 500 million, okay? That's in terms of what the data that's generated within Twitter, okay? Now you see 4 petabytes, okay? All of these are forms of data, and then the value or the amount of that that's generated in some place or some particular sense. Okay, now I'll go ahead and then share this particular link with you. You can just take a look at that. It's a quite interesting article. I'll just go ahead and then share that with you all, probably after the session as well, if there's time for that. All right, so going ahead now, in terms of companies, right now, you know that we talk about data-driven companies, right? And this was a statistics that was given by New Vantage, Big Data, and then the AI survey. And out of this particular, how do you call it, survey, what they realized was that out of, if you pick 100 companies, right, only 23 of them can say that what they've achieved data-driven culture. Now, data-driven culture in the sense that with every decision or with how they run the operations, they're actually able to use data to their advantage, okay? But it's just about 26 of them out of, let's say, 100 that you pick who have actually been able to do that. Now, another survey. So people recognize the importance of data. Companies recognize the importance of data. But here, we get to see that what from the Global State of Enterprise Analytics, that's in 2020, right? It tells us that what it's only about 14%, okay, of companies who actually make data accessible to their employees. So these companies actually recognize that, okay, data is important, but now making it available or accessible to their employees to make their work very simple and easier, we find that it's only just 14% of these companies that do that. Now, one final statistics that we'll look at, and this was by Gartner Predicts, okay? And now with this, what it gets to tell us is that what by 2023, that's this year, okay? So most of the data that companies and then organizations would actually be using would be stored in public cloud, okay? So when we talk about public cloud, we're talking about AWS, the GCP, and all of that. And this is actually true anyway. So a lot of companies actually get to store their data in there. So you can have, let's say, Snowflake or Amazon Redshift or Google BigQuery. Okay, so you have lots of companies now storing their data in there. So these are just some statistics to get the conversation started and to get us on board as we go along as well. Now, let's just dive into that. So farm management, okay, so we're talking about efficient data and then farm management. So when we talk about farm management, what are we talking about? So when you talk about farm management, let's say you have your computer system, for example. Now, when we talk about you running or you having some form of farm management in there, it means that within your system, okay, now you are able to what? To make sure that what? You handle the creation of some form of data on that system. Okay, so on that system, let's say you have your computer, maybe you now group your music, you group your pictures, okay? These are all concepts that come to farm management. Let's say you do a download or you create a new test file, okay? All of these things actually fall in place when it comes to file management. But take note, even though you are doing file management, with everything that you are trying to, let's say, put or classify as a file, there would actually be an underlying data source or a data component that forms that, okay? So that brings us to the concept of what? Data management, okay? Now, data management now goes ahead to talk about what? How you now gather, okay? So you gather the data, wherever it is, okay? And then how you store it. Now, if you store it, you don't just store it, but how you use it effectively. Now, if you are using that effectively, it comes to terms with what? How safe it is, how effective it is, and then what? How economical it is. Now, we'll talk about some aspects of the safe, effective, and then economical aspects of that as we go along. But that's for the data management. So let's say you gather, you actually do a survey. So we had a survey from Gartner, for example. Now, when they gather that data, how do they even gather it at all? How do they get it to the customers? Okay, that's part of data management. Now, when they pick that information from the customers, let's say maybe through a Google form or some other form, okay, or maybe verbal interactions, right? How do they now store that particular information? Do they store that in, let's say, an Excel file, for example, or they store it in a database? Now, all of these are things that you consider. And then how safe is it? Is it accessible to everyone? Or it's accessible to some specific people? Okay, so these are we talk about. And the economical aspect. So if we are storing the data, are we making sure that no matter what, we actually get to save on that? So that we don't, let's say, take about 10 gigabytes of database to store this particular data. And then we are just using 1 gigabyte of that. So all of these form some part of that. And then there are data management solutions that make it possible, okay, for you to now store this data, okay. Now, with this particular presentation, I'll not really dive into the services and then point them out, but subsequently, I hope to share on some bits of that in the future. All right, so let's go ahead with the data management. So when we talk about the data management, what are some of the challenges that you actually get to face? Okay, so if you are managing your data, what is some of the challenges that you get to face? Now, the very first one has to do with data security and then compliance. Now, I mentioned earlier, and then I think Estelle also mentioned that this is the cybersecurity awareness month. And cybersecurity is not something that happens just within a particular month. It goes beyond. Just give a second. All right, so cybersecurity is not something that goes just within 1 month. It goes beyond just that October. But this particular month, it becomes prudent that we talk about security for the most part because it's very important, okay? So one challenge you face as, let's say, managing your data becomes the data security, okay? And then there are some compliance laws. So let's say you are working in the healthcare industry, for example, you might have to adhere to HIPAA laws, for example, and then that becomes a challenge to someone because you might not know how to actually now conform to that or how to set your systems up for that. Now, if you are in the financial sector, for example, you could have the PCI DSS. That's if you are taking some bit of a credit card details. Okay, so this becomes a challenge when you are managing your data. Okay, now aside that, we talk about data backup and then recovery. Okay, so then how do you back up your data so that should in case the unexplainable happen, that you can still be able to recover your information. So that becomes a challenge in there. Now, another thing has to do with the data volume and then variety. So you'd note that, with the diagram that we saw earlier, you'd notice that there's so much data. Let me just share that briefly. So if you look at the values here, you have 500 million here. You have 4 petabytes, you have 463 exabytes, 65 billion. These are very large amounts of data. So imagine as an organization, and then you now have to go ahead and then store these. That becomes a challenge, okay? And it's not like you have the same data. Let's say you are just storing numbers. You have numbers in there. You have some aspects to do with images, multimedia files, and all of that. This becomes another challenge in there. Now, another thing has to do with data migration and then legacy systems. So you are working on, let's say, a system, okay, that's for 2002. And then now you have to migrate it to a more modern system. So a typical example, let's say you are working with Microsoft Word, and then you had, you are working with Microsoft SP, okay, Windows SP. That's from a very long time ago. And then with all your systems, they are actually based off Windows XP. Now, currently we have Windows 11. How would you be able to now migrate that data to make sure that your system actually works perfectly so that it doesn't break when you are done with the migration? So that also becomes something that you think about. Now, the next challenge that you could think about is the data lifecycle management. So how do you manage the life cycle of the data? Now, if you see a butterfly, for example, you notice that there's a particular life cycle the butterfly will follow over a period of time. Now, with data, it becomes the same things. Now, let's say you have a social media account yourself. You'd notice that with the pictures, let's say you might have more interactions with recent pictures that you've uploaded. Now, pictures from 2009, you might not have so much interaction with that. So how do you save in terms of, if you are managing your data? Don't forget, we talked about efficiency, right? So how do you ensure that even with the data that's in 2009, I store it in such a way, or I manage it in such a way that I save on cost, okay? So you could think about, let's say, moving some of your files to an archive storage such that if you need it, then we could actually now recover that for you, okay? So that becomes that. Now, the next thing has to do with scalability. So let's say, still with the large data volumes, right? So you have a large data volume. How would you now scale your system, okay, to meet that large volume of data? Or you have more users. how would you scale your system to make sure that what you now have access to all of that? And then another thing is to do with data collaboration and then sharing. Just give a second. All right. So another thing has to do with the data collaboration and then sharing. Okay. Now, with the stats that we looked at, you realize that there was a particular stat that was talking about how people recognize the importance of data. But in the end, they are not able to now go ahead and then share it with others. Okay. Even though they are supposed to share it with others, they don't go ahead to share it with others. So in terms of managing your data, how would you now collaborate on data? So let's say we are working on an Excel sheet. How do I make sure that what I actually get to share it with some other people? Okay, so these are all aspects that you look at. And then the final thing that we'll talk about in this regard has to do with what? The data privacy regulations. Okay, now in Ghana, for example, we have some laws, okay, in terms of what data privacy that you have to follow. Now, aside Ghana, within different countries, there are some privacy regulations that you have to follow. So if you are managing data of, let's say, you are a company in Ghana, and then you have some users from the European Union, for example, you'd have an extra challenge in the sense that you now have to consider GDPR, that's the General Data Protection Regulation, okay, because that's something that's for EU members, okay, so that would be an extra challenge that you'd have to face, okay. Now, I talked about, let's say, within the healthcare industry or the card payment industry, there are regulations that you have to follow in there, and that might also become what some challenge that you'd look at. Now, if you are able to surmount these challenges, right, what are the benefits that you could actually go ahead to derive from that? Now, the very first thing that you derive is informed decision making. That means that with the data that you get, right, you are able to now make informed decisions. So let's say you are able to determine that, okay, within the periods of, let's say, 10:30 to 11:30, right, more people will be available to join the session, or more people will be interested in what? Making posts on Facebook. As a social media manager, that becomes something that you could actually gather from how you store that data or how you view that data. Another thing is that you also get to be what? Compliant to any regulations. Okay, so the efficient file and then data management, make sure that what you are compliant in some way. So you are compliant, let's say, with your card payment system or something like that. Okay, and all of these are important and then available to you. Another thing is in terms of what? Innovation and then agility. Okay, so all of these are possible as well. And then you have the competitive advantage. So customers who are actually able to now use their data very well, they have an advantage over others. So let's say a social media marketer who knows about competitive advantage is now able to know that, okay, within this period, if I post items, okay, I'm able to get more feedback from that. And you also have what? Data security. So security falls through in there. So that what? You can have people who are authorized to access some data, be able to access it. Those who are not authorized will not have access to that. And then the final thing, or the next stage, sorry, is in terms of the customer-centric approach. Now, you notice that as a business, your main focus is towards your customer. Okay. Now, if you are able to manage your file and then your data effectively, you are able to now what? Have an approach towards your customer, which is customer-centric. So based on the file and then the data that you're able to gather, you are now able to what? To approach your customer in a way that will put them at the center of everything that you do. And then the next thing is in terms of cost saving. So I gave an example in terms of what, let's say with your pictures, right? So if you move that to an archival storage based on your data management principles, that actually gets to save some cost for you. And then the last thing is in terms of the scalability and then growth. Okay, so how you scale your system and then how you actually are able to accommodate, let's say, more users or more services within your environment. So these are the benefits that you actually look at when it comes to file and then data management. Of course, there are others, but these become what? The key things that we highlight in this session. Now, we want to go ahead and then we want to look at the file and file storage options. So if we are storing our files, okay, we are still talking about the efficient file and data management. Now, if I want to store some files, what are the options that are available to me? Now, we're actually looking at 4 different options, okay? We have the object storage, we have the block storage, we have file storage, and then we'll talk about archival storage as well. So let's look at the object storage. Now, when we say object storage, now object storage actually helps you to store your data, let's say, in an unstructured way. Okay, so you could have, let's say, a media file, an MP3 file, and then you store that within your system. Okay, in an that's an unstructured data because you don't actually have any table that you are going by. Okay, it's just that data which is not necessarily structured in one way or the other. So you are able to store that, and then you are able to have a unique identifier which can point to that data. Now, what are the characteristics? So in terms of if you want to have like a large amount of data, okay, so large volumes of unstructured data, so that includes, let's say, multimedia files and then backups. This is an option that you could actually have. So as a company, let's say as part of your data management practices, right, you could go ahead and then take an object storage service and then use that for your backups. Okay, that becomes very easy for you to work with. Now, aside that, with the object storage, you do not have, let's say, predefined storage limits, and then it's scalable. Now, let me give an example from this. So within the AWS environment, for example, okay, we talk about S3 as an object storage service. Now, the good thing is that within S3, for example, you can have up to 5 terabytes of data. Okay, so with a single file or with a single object, you can have up to about 5 terabytes for the size. Okay, now it's not 5 gigabytes. Okay, just think about it. It's not 5 gigabytes, but it's 5 terabytes. That's like one single file. Okay, that's something that object storage allows you to do or offers to you. Okay, now another thing is the durability, and then in terms of data redundancy. So object storage are what? Durable, okay, and then they are what? They help you to do away with redundancy. You actually get to do away with any redundancies within any system that you are working with, and then you go along with that as well. Now, in terms of the use cases, so if I have, let's say, an object storage, what can I use it for? Now, you can use it to store multimedia content, which we've actually mentioned already. And then you can use that for backup and then archival storage. We'll talk about archival storage as we go along, but you can still use the object storage for a backup and then archival storage. Now, in addition to that, you can host static files. So I don't know, but I still keep coming back to S3 because that's one of the widely known storage services, object storage services. Now with S3, for example, anyone who is conversant with the AWS infrastructure, you get to know that what you can actually use that to host, let's say, some static website. Okay, I think one session that I did actually talked about hosting static websites on S3. Yeah, but probably you could just search for that as well and then see how that goes. But you can use the object storage. You can actually go ahead to host some static websites in there. Now, let's go ahead and then let's look at the block storage. Now, when it comes to block storage, what's block storage? Now, if you are storing data in blocks, okay, now if you think about blocks, it means that what? You have one block, you have another block, and then you join them together to form, let's say, a structure, okay? That becomes the underlying concept when it comes to the block storage. So you have what? Data split into different blocks, okay? Now, once it's stored, right, each of them have their unique identifier, but in passing the data, then you can just put that data together in one space or in one setting, okay? That becomes the main concept of that. Now, it also has its characteristics and then advantages in terms of what you have to do or what you have to accomplish, okay? So with the characteristics, now, it provides high performance and low latency data access. So high performance in the sense that whatever data you are storing, you are able to access it in a very efficient way, okay? So still with the efficiency, you're able to now access that in a very efficient way. And then low latency. Now, when we talk about latency, it means that what? How long it takes for that data to get to the user. Okay, now over the internet, if there's some form of high latency, it means that there might be some lag in there, but you need to have the lowest latency as much as possible. And then that's one thing you can have with the block storage. Now, aside that, okay, it's suitable for databases, for virtual machines, and then application data. If you are hosting a database, right, you could actually have a block store where you store your information in there. If you have a virtual machine, you could actually have that as well. And then if you are storing, let's say, some form of application data, some data for your application, that's also something that you could do. Now, another characteristic is that it allows you to modify data at the block level. Now, when I was talking about the object storage, I mentioned that it's quite large in terms of the volume of data. Okay, so let's say you could have 4 terabytes file within one particular file. Now, what happens if I want to make a change to that file? Just think about it. If I want to make a change to that file, does that mean that I have to re-upload that file again? Okay, something like that. Of course, there might be some workarounds to that, but that's what you have in terms of the object store. But when you come to the block store, based on the fact that the data is split into multiple parts, right? Now, if I want to modify a segment of this, it means that based on the system that I'm using, it could identify that, okay, this particular modification will have to take place with this particular block of data. So you don't have to make the change across the entirety of that particular data that you are going to access. Okay, so that's for the modification. Okay, so that becomes very easy for you as you go along. Now, these are just a few characteristics. Let's look at some of the use cases. So when would I actually want to use a block store, for example? Now, we talked about the databases. Okay, so that's something that's there. And then we have storage area networks. Okay, now if you did some bit of ICT back in school, they have lots of networks. So we have the local area networks, the wide area networks, and all of that. So these are all options which are available to you. But here, you could actually use the block store for your storage area network. So it means that you have a shared form of storage, which you can now have other people access over the period of time. So that's one thing you could have when you are using the block store. Okay. Now, aside that, you could also look at the virtual machines. Okay, so this is also another option. We've talked about that also. Now, let's move on and then let's look at file storage. Okay, now within our Windows system, okay, we actually get to use some bit of file storage. Now, if I ask you that, let's say you did a download, okay, and then I ask you to find that particular file for me, you tell me that, okay, go to, let's say, drive C, and then from drive C, go to users. Now, if I go to users, that's also another folder or a file by itself. Now, drive C is there, and under drive C, we have users. We could have, let's say, program files, and then other folders as well. But I'll step into the program, the users, and when I get to users, I identify my name, let's say Emmanuel, okay, and then I pick on that. Now, there could be other users who also have their folders within the users folder. And then once I go to Emmanuel as my username, I could now step down and then say that, okay, I don't want a document, I don't want a picture, I want the downloads folder. Then you go to the downloads folder, and then you are able to now see that. Okay, so that's what it means by similar to a standard file system. So within a file storage, you have that form of similarity. So you have the data arranged in the hierarchical order, okay, with the directories and then the files. So you have one directory, you step into another directory, another one, till you get to the file in question that you want to work with. Now, what are the characteristics that come to mind when you are using the file storage? The very first one is that it allows people to now go ahead and then share files more easily. Okay, so you can now share those files with others. Now, another thing is in terms of the sharing still, you can share that on a network. Okay, so within a network file system, you could go ahead and then share that. And then it supports read and then write access that is simultaneous. So if one person is actually making change to the file, another person can also be able to access that file. That's the simultaneous nature in there. So you can read and then write simultaneously. And let me state here that in terms of reading the file with the other types of storage, they are able to do that, okay? They're able to read from the file. Now, when it comes to writing, that's where there might be some bit of an issue, but with the file storage, that's where it actually excels in, okay? All right. Now, in terms of the use cases, okay, so if you have users within a system, so let's say you have a network within your office, you could actually use the file share to share some bit of information. Now, a typical example that comes to mind, it might not necessarily be, let's say, a file storage, but you notice that if you are in an office, right, and then you have one printer, everyone would actually be connected to that one printer. Okay, so that printer is actually shared amongst everyone. And then any user at all can go ahead, issue a command, print a file, and then be able to access that. Okay, so that becomes more or less like a thought process when you are talking about what file sharing. So you have a designated place, you have some bit of information there, and then everyone can be able to access that. Now, another use case is the shared network drives. Okay, so as we are sharing the data amongst people, okay, you could have that done over a network as well. Okay, so a network of computers, maybe your local network, or even over the internet. These are all possible for you. And then another thing is in terms of what? The document management systems. So you have a document management system, you could actually use a file storage to make that happen, because with a document management system, you'd actually now have to share the information across with other people. Okay, so that's that. Now, the next thing we'll look at is in terms of the archive storage. Okay, now archive has to do with let's say long-term use, okay, or let me not say long-term use. So you want to use the data at a later time, okay, so that becomes possible to have. Okay, that's with the archive data. So you don't access it frequently. It's something you access maybe once a year. So a typical example that comes to mind. So let's say within your system, there is a corporation that actually has to do audit on your system. Now, with the auditing of the system, what might be is that data that they will audit, is stored somewhere, and they might access it just once within the year. Now, if it's something like that, it's easier for you to just put that in an archive storage, so that what? Because you don't access it frequently. It's just that one time in a month or one time in a year that you access that. That becomes the thought you have when you have archive storage, okay? All right, now the characteristics. So it still allows you to share files, and then it's excellent for network file shares, documents, and then structured data. Okay, you see that broad look of that. So it combines with the network file shares. Okay, so network file shares, that's in terms of the file storage. Documents, you could still look at some bit of file storage. Structured data, you can look at the object and then the block storage. Okay. All right. And then it supports also read and write that is simultaneous. All right. Okay, so that brings us in terms of what? The storage options that are available. Okay. Now, one thing to note, someone will ask, so which one would I use as a company, or which one would I use as an organization? The truth is that for every task that you are doing, one particular type of storage might suit that as compared to another one. So let's say you want to host a virtual machine, and object storage will not be able to host that virtual machine for you. You'd have to now go ahead and then use a block storage, for example. Now, after you've created a virtual machine, you want to create a backup in there. When you back up your system, you don't store that backup on the object storage. You actually go ahead and you don't store that on the block storage. You go ahead, pick that backup, and then place that within an object storage. So you realize that what? There are different forms, and then they are interlinked based on the needs that you have. Okay, so definitely there will always be what? A combination of these data types. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and then let's look at databases. We've heard about databases for a lot of types. Okay, now databases, we talk about, let's say, structured data. Okay, now when we talk about databases in the modern day, we don't just talk about structured data. There are different forms in there. But the database, what it does is that allows you to what? To store, manage, organize, and then retrieve what? Data. Okay, so you could have, let's say, we pick a social media, for example. You realize that if I upload, let's say, with YouTube, where we are working on or working with right now, you realize that I upload a video. There are some bits of information that's in the video. So if you upload a video that I come, I'll see that, okay, 15 people have actually accessed that video. Okay, and then the video was uploaded on this particular day. Now, aside that, it was, let's say, user A or user B that uploaded this. Now, if I click on user A, user B, I get to see the other videos that user A or that is where the data comes in. Okay, now there are various kinds of database systems, and you can have that, let's say, on-prem, okay, where you are within your computer, or you can have that somewhere else within the cloud as well. Now, with types, okay, there are quite a number of types which are available. We have the relational database, we have the hierarchical database, the non-relational database, and then the object-oriented database. I'll just touch on the relational and then the non-relational databases. Okay, with that, you actually go ahead and then read on that. Let me find the link in there. All right, I'll share those resources with all of you. All right, great. So with the relational database, now relational database have like a structured format. So you could have, let's say, still with video that we talked about. So we can have, let's say, an ID, a unique identifier, which identifies the video. Now, in addition to the unique identifier, we could have another heading, which is for the name. Okay, so what name or what's the name of the person who is actually uploading that video? You have the name there. Okay, and then what's the name of the file itself? Okay, that also goes on. Then we'll have a spot to tell us, okay, which time was this video created? Okay, and then we'll go on and on from there as well. So that's for the relational database. So there's some form of structure in there. Now, the non-relational database does not have that, let's say, necessarily that structure. So you could have, let's say, a key value pair. You could have different forms in there. So you could have, let's say, a graph look at within that database. You could have even a document, okay, within that database. These are all options that you could have in. And they become very important or necessary when you are actually going ahead to manage your data. So let's say you've collected some bit of information from some clients or users. You can store them within the database, but how would you store it? Okay, that all forms a part of what the approach that you go by. All right. Now, I want us to move ahead and we talk about some form of security components in there. Okay, so we want to talk about safeguarding your data assets. So you have your data in there. Okay, how would you now go ahead to, let's say, save that data or secure that data? Okay, now when you are managing your data, take note. Okay, data is the new gold, and literally everyone would want to have access to that. So let's say you are storing some purchases from your clients. So you actually have an online shop and you are storing that data. Now, people would actually want to get that data that you have within your system because they know that once they have access to that, they have lots of interesting information. They could have credit card details in there. They could have lists of people. They could have, I mean, some personally identifiable information, which they could actually use for themselves. Okay, but how do you now safeguard this data? Okay, now the first thing we'll talk about is encryption. Okay, now encryption. Let me see how I actually describe that. But encryption would have to do with what? Making sure that what you. Okay, so encryption will have to do with secure your data in such a way that what you'd actually modify, not necessarily modify the data, but make sure that what anyone who has access to that data cannot be able to access it or cannot be able to view what that data is. Except they have a particular key. The key, it means that you could not actually enter into to access that particular house or whichever place that the key is for. Okay, so that's literally what comes to mind with encryption. I mean, as simple as it gets. Okay, now with the method, we have the transit. Okay, so in transit and then at rest. Now, there are times when you have data within your system stored there and then available to whoever wants to access that. Now, when it's stored within your system, it has to be encrypted so that your employees, for example, would not know what the data entails, except they are authorized to do that, and then they have the key. Now, aside that, when you are moving the data from one point to another, you'd also have to make sure that what no one on the internet can actually eavesdrop on that particular data. Now, a typical example we see within the WhatsApp client, for example, you see that what they'll tell you that, okay, we are using this type of encryption or that type of encryption. Okay, that's the whole concept in there. Now, aside that, we have the identity and access control. Okay, so still accessing the data, right? Who is actually authorized to access the data? So let's say an admin, okay, as an identity can be able to access that. And then let's say the finance person can be able to access that. Now, if you are a developer, you might not be able to access that. Okay, that's in terms of based on your identity. And then the access control. So the access control would actually determine, okay, now based on this method or that method, right? This person can view this. Okay, so the control would be, okay, can view or can edit. Now, if you are working with Google Docs, for example, and you are sharing a link to someone to access, you could have, let's say, an editor, let's say, role, or you could have, let's say, a viewer role, or you could have an owner role where you can actually transfer that ownership. All of these are what access control methods which are available for your data. So if you are thinking about your data, how you actually go ahead to manage them, these are all aspects that you have to consider. Now, the next thing, we've actually talked about this quite a lot today on different sides of things. That's with regards to what the compliance. Okay, so what are the compliance methods that are available? So let's say within your area that you are working with. So if you're working in the healthcare industry, right, there are some compliances that you'd have to follow. And these compliances are there to make sure that what your data is secure at all points in time. If you are in the healthcare industry, there would also be some rules that you'd have to follow. Okay, now we are conversant with, for example, the payment services which are available within the country. Now, one of the things that Bank of Ghana does in collaboration with other agencies is to ensure that what these companies meet specific regulations. So if some specific regulations are not being met, you know, these companies now what gets taken off or their license actually becomes suspended. Okay, so these are all things that becomes very necessary in there as well. Now, we'd go ahead and then we look at the best practices for data management. Okay, now, what are some of the best practices that you can have? So the first one is the data categorization and then target. Now, I spoke about the e-commerce side, for example. Now, if we take, let's say, for example, the details to do with the payment details, that becomes what? Some bit of information that would want to guard at all costs, okay? Because we don't want anyone to access that. It means that it would have what? A high priority, or where we are categorizing that, we would actually conditions or situations, okay? Now, for all of these, when you are managing your data, you have to put in mind that what? You have to categorize them where necessary. Now, aside that, we still come back to the identity and then access controls. Okay, these are also important. And talk about what? Regular data backup. Now, for WhatsApp, for example, okay, you notice that every day there's actually some bit of backup being done in the background. And if you look at, if you look within your file system, you'd realize that it actually stores the backup daily, but it keeps 7 or so of the backup over a period of time. And then once it exceeds the 7, right, it actually deletes that. Now, if you are managing your data, these are some of the things that you consider. So how regular would the backup be? And then how would you actually store these backups? What would be the life cycle of the backup? How long would you keep a particular backup file for? Okay, these are all things that you would actually look at. And you notice here with the last point that we have here, in terms of what testing and then drills. Now, as an organization or a business, one of the things you have to do is to make sure that what you actually test the backups for your system. You don't wait till when, let's say, an incident occurs before you do that. So this has to be part of what your processes daily, okay, as part of your management, your data management platforms. You have to do that what daily as well. Now, let's go ahead and then let's look at what the strategies for data integration and then migration. Now, with this, if you want to transfer data, so let's say we talked about moving from, let's say, an SP system to a Windows 11 system, for example, how would you go about that? Or you want to move data from one PC to another, or from your local system to a provider, a website provider. How would you go about that? So these are data transfer solutions that you could look at. Now we have something we call FTP, that's the file transfer protocol. And there's SFTP, which is what the secure file transfer protocol. These are all available to you. Now, for anyone who's done some bit of website development in the past, this becomes some of the things that the websites you use to actually move your website files to your host, okay, whichever one that would be. Another thing you could look at would be the managed file transfer services. And then we have the database migration service. So you want to move from one database to another. What service would you look at? These are all things that you have. And so we have the cloud DMS, which is the cloud data migration services. So literally all the cloud providers have some migration services which are available for you. So if you are moving from your local host to the cloud, you have a way you go about that. And then another thing is to do with data transformation and then ETL processes. ETL stands for extract, transform, and then load, okay? So you have some bit of data, you want to make sense of that data, especially let's say you are working with the data analytics, right? How would you now go ahead to extract that data in whatever form it's stored? And then how would you transform it into a manner that's easier for you to understand, or for whichever service you are using to process, okay? So these are all things that you should actually look at. And these are some of the services which are available for you as you go along. All right, so we had some use cases, and I mentioned that we might not have time to actually go over them. Let me see. Just give me a second here. All right, so I'll share that here. You could actually go ahead and then read them when you have the time. All right, so I've shared a link. I think that'll be shared with you. That actually gives you some bit of overview in terms of Levy, Strauss, and then Majid Al Futtaim, and then how they actually went ahead to manage their data systems. Okay, but since we do not have time, just maybe skip on that for now. Okay, okay, let's do this. So this is actually for Petrosi, okay, another company altogether, and this is actually the benefit they derived when they actually went ahead to manage their data in an efficient way. Okay, so in terms of their profits, right, that became something that surged. In terms of their innovation and then the relevance, that's also something that they got to achieve in it. Now, another thing is the things that they got to achieve in it. Now, for Levy, okay, one thing that they got was that they had some data-driven insight. So they had insight into how their customers operate, because they were able to now manage their data efficiently. Okay. Now, for their growth, that was also something that went increased over the period. And once they were actually doing this was during the COVID period, and it allowed them to meet the changing environment and the changing climate, because they were particular about the data management practices, and then engaging data technology to make things work for them. Okay, so these are some of the benefits, as a business, as you focus on your security, as you focus on the file and the data management practices. These are some of the things that you'd actually get to attain from that. All right, so let's look at the last part from here, and then we could go ahead if there are some questions. We look at that. So in terms of the data management, right, what are some of the aspects of, let's say, challenges that you get to have over the period, and then what are some of the possible solutions that you get? Okay, now security and privacy, we spoke about that. Okay, so it's pretty much easy to understand. So in terms of encryption, in terms of access controls, these are all things that you could have. Now, what if I want to scale my system? What are some of the things I use? Now, you have cloud-based solutions. Now, I'm actually putting together a blog. Okay, I'll share it with you guys later on. You could just check that out as well. Let me share the link before I forget. All right, so you could check that out. I'll have one out today. It's a 2-part blog. I'll have one out today, and then you could look at in terms of the cloud provider, AWS, and then some solutions they have for when you have to now store your data. Okay, now going ahead, another thing you could look at is in terms of the data backup and then the disaster recovery. That becomes an issue. We talked about that earlier. So the solution will be definitely for you to back up your data regularly. Now, AWS also has some services that makes this possible for you. Okay, so these are done automatically for you. They don't have to worry so much about that. Now, if you want to retrieve data and then make it accessible, okay, the key thing is in terms of the cataloging of the data. So how do you catalog it? And then how do you grant permissions or access control for the users? And then the final thing is in terms of the data quality. Now, for people who might be doing data analytics, this becomes a key thing to think about. So once you have some form of data, right, you have to clean it before you can be able to analyze that. Okay, so one thing to do is that you actually, if you have data which does not have so much of a good quality as a challenge, okay, within your data management system, okay, you can go ahead and then implement the data cleansing, and then you can do some validation as well. So validate the data, and then you actually have some monitoring available as well to make sure that your data is accurate across all points. Now, we talked about actually having data which is durable. Okay, so all of these things has to be implemented there to make sure that that durability lasts. Okay, all right. Now, as part of the durability, there's a redundancy, right? So for most systems, cloud systems, for example, they actually spread your data across different servers to make sure that even if one server fails, right, you still have access to your data. And then you have to make sure that that data is accurate. Okay, so what are some of the things that you have to do? So you just employ these, and then they actually get to do that for you. All right, great. So I think that brings us to the end of the slides. Okay, I know I left out the use cases, but the link would actually be shared with you guys, and then you could check that out. So Esther, over to you. If there are some questions, we could take them as well.
Thank you so much, Mingo, for such a wonderful session. So the question that is on my table, the question that is on my table is, what are some of the common mistakes businesses make in terms of data management that can leave them vulnerable to cyber attacks? Did you catch that? Yeah.
Just take that again.
Yes. So the question is, what are the common mistakes businesses make in terms of data management that leave them vulnerable to cyber threats?
Okay. All right. So the common mistakes, I think I'll talk about that in terms of the threats that businesses face. Now, one thing you should notice is that you have threats within your organization, and then you have threats outside the organization as well. Okay. Now we talked about the access control and all of that. Now, the insider person, okay, he can have access to that system. It's readily available, but you have to make sure that that particular data has some bit of access control in there. So who can be able to access that? Can a developer be able to access that? Can user A be able to access that? So if companies do not actually put these controls in place, right, it means that the attackers who are maybe inside, they could still have access to that. Now, if someone from outside comes in, right, first thing, how's your defense perimeter like, or how's your security posture like? And is it porous enough for them to enter into your system? Okay, that becomes some of the challenges that would actually cause some issues. Now, once the attacker is in there, if you've not implemented the controls very well for an internal person, they could actually take advantage of that and then create havoc within your system. So you start internally in terms of the access control, and then you build outside in terms of the perimeter, how others may not be able to enter into your system. So those are some of the things that you'd actually.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And also, just a quick one, in terms of data breach, what can be done
Okay.
in the data management? Yeah.
Yes. So I think I don't really talk so much on data breaches, but data breach, if your data is breached, that becomes an issue. But it still comes back to the point that you have to make sure that no one actually gets in. Okay. Now, when they get in, and then let's say they disrupt your system or your services, what helps you will be, let's say, the backup that you've been able to do. Okay. Now, let's say with the drills. Okay. Now, there was some point I was talking about the drills in there. Now, if you've run a drill to know how you respond, it becomes easier. You don't have to now, let's say, pick up looking around and saying, what will we do? No, because you know how it actually responds in there. Okay, so having these drills, being prepared, creating the backup available, that actually helps you in terms of data breach. And once there's a data breach, in some jurisdictions, there are some protocols that you have to follow. So in terms of your customers, in terms of law enforcement agencies, in terms of the agencies that are concerned with the cybersecurity side of things, you'd actually have to inform them. In Ghana, the Cybersecurity Authority, you have to inform them about that, and then they could actually provide some assistance if there is such a said breach. But first things first, make sure to secure a system. You might not be able to secure it completely, but make sure there are right measures put in place at all times. Yes.
All right, thank you for that tip as well. And we have to just wrap up so soon. We hope that we can have another session with you where you take us through, practical steps in knowing about all these things you've shared with us. And we really appreciate your time and your insights in data management for businesses. So before ending today's program, I want to introduce you to an amazing online resource that you may find helpful. And this is the eLibrary USA. The eLibrary USA is a state-of-the-art digital library with 9 premium electronic databases that include digital newspapers, magazines, journals, videos, and dissertations. Usually, this resource is only available to use in person at our American spaces, but with the global pandemic, we are opening up access to this amazing resource. If you are interested, sign up using the link that can be found in the comment section below. And this program was proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy Ghana, American Corner Aboba, in partnership with Mobile Web Ghana. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, please do. We have insightful sessions coming up this month and even beyond. So till we come your way again, this concludes our program. Stay safe and have a happy weekend. Bye.